everyone, this is Caisha with TGN, bringing you the guide to Amber Shaper Unsock, both heroic and normal. Unsock is the 5th boss in the Heart of Fear instance. It consists of 3 phases. You will only need 2 tanks and 6 healers for this, with a mixture of DPS as usual. This fight does share a lot of similarities with that of Professor Putricide in ICC, since it does involve players mutating into a monster. Phase 1 lasts until 70%, and DPS does its thing. Ranged DPS should be killing the amber oozes that spawn. And then Unsock summons the giant lava elemental called Amber Monstrosity during Phase 2. When that happens, DPS should focus on killing the monstrosity, since Unsock takes 99% reduced damage. Phase 3 happens when that monstrosity is killed. This is going to be the clinch your butts portion of the fight, with massively increased damage from the boss, so do try your best to have most of your cooldowns up for this portion, both healing and DPS. During each phase, you have to deal with 3 consistent issues. Constructs, and this spell is called Reshape Life. This consists of players being mutated, and I will explain this in detail later, since it is probably the most complicated mechanic of the fight. Amber Scalpels, which target a random person, and they're followed by a laser beam which creates pools on the ground. Basically, the only way you deal with this is you just have to kite it backwards and don't let the point hit anyone, since it does a decent amount of damage. The pools it leaves will sometimes spawn amber oozes, which are called living amber. These ambers will deal damage to players around it, and when they die, they will heal other oozes nearby, so it is important to place them 8 yards from each other when they die. Parasitic growth is the 3rd thing you'll have to deal with during every phase of the fight. This is a debuff that's placed on a random raid member for 30 seconds, and healing received, including HOTS, ground effects like efflorescence, and direct heals will increase that damage done. So only having 1 designated healer for growths is very beneficial. The damage on this is manageable. Sacred Shields, Hand of Purity, and Power Word Shields are perfect for this, as it does not affect the debuff. In Phase 2, you will also have to watch for Massive Stomp, which basically means that ranged and healers need to stay greater than 15 yards away, because it knocks players back. And then there's Fling, which takes a tank and throws them into the raid and setting people around that tank for 3 seconds. Basically, don't stack too tightly. And Amber Explosion, which should always be interrupted by constructs, but in case it's not, you always must use cooldowns, especially Rallying Cries. Phase 3 is a straight up boss burn phase. You use Bloodlust, all cooldowns, just go for the gold. Do not focus on the construct this phase. People who are constructs during this phase should just interrupt themselves and consume amber pools to avoid dying. So let's go ahead and take a look at the most complex part of the Amber Shaper fight, mutated constructs. Everyone will have to deal with this at some point, so it's crucial that every single person in the raid understands how constructs work, because if you don't, it will cause wipes, and it will be very frustrating. When you get targeted with Reshape Life, you will transfer into a magma ad called a mutated construct. This ad will have willpower. Essentially, your job while you're in this form is to A, not die due to lack of willpower, which causes an instant death once you hit 0. B, interrupt the monstrosity's amber explosion by pressing 1, and you must be targeting the monstrosity for this to happen. And C, interrupt your own amber explosion by pressing 2. Once someone is transformed into a construct, the DPS must immediately get them below 20% health so that they can leave the construct whenever they want by pressing 4. The number 3 ability lets you consume the yellow pools on the ground, but this is almost never necessary unless you are a tank. This gives you some willpower back, but it does increase your health by 5%. Tanks can use this ability to stay in construct form, but DPS and healers should never absorb pools since it does distract from DPS on the boss. It is also important to track the timer on the monstrosity's explosion, since you should be spamming 1 in order to put stacks on the monstrosity, which will cause it to take increased damage. So even though you spam it, be sure to have it up when it casts Amber Explosion. Tanks and only tanks will get mutated in Phase 1, and their job is to interrupt and spam 1 to keep the damage stacks on Unsock. Their job is to stay in construct form until the next one spawns, which is roughly every 50 seconds. This means they will have to absorb 1 to 2 pools in order to keep willpower from reaching 0. That's pretty much the normal version of the fight, just rinse and repeat. DPS priority is always going to be constructs down to 20% in which they stop DPS, and then the monstrosity, and then Unsock, and then living ambers. So for the heroic portion of the fight, everything is the same, but keeping the destabilized stacks on Unsock is crucial in Phase 1 and 2. If stacks are lost, Phase 3 becomes infinitely harder and you will probably wipe. This means that you must keep at least 1 person in construct form at all times, either the tanks or DPS. and have them refresh the stacks on Unsock, not the monstrosity, Unsock. The stacks last 15 seconds, so you have a little bit of leeway in between. The biggest addition is Amber Globules in Phase 3, which select 2 random players who must get out of the raid immediately, and a ball will follow each one of them, a la Sinestra. If the ball hits the targeted player and the player is within 30 yards of the raid, it is an automatic raid wipe. It's like 600,000 damage. If the balls come into contact with each other through careful maneuvering of both players, they will disappear with no damage done. Alternatively, you can just send each player off to a corner 30 yards away and just have them die. This works because it is unlikely that you will get a second set of balls and still be alive, because they spawn every 40 seconds. In a Phase 3 lasts more than 40 seconds, healers are done, raid's probably dead, pretty much. So there's the guide to Amber Shaper Unsock. I hope you found it informative. Once again, this is Caisha. Please be sure to leave feedback and questions in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.